With over 15,000 suburbs across Australia, how do you know where to invest next and which markets are set to outperform? I'm Tim Graham and the Property Playbook starts now. Today we're diving into Terry Ryder's National Top 10 Best Buys report, a hand-picked list of the most promising locations for capital growth and strong rental returns across the country. Backed by data and decades of market analysis, these locations have been chosen for their long-term potential, not media hype. Joining me today, Terry Ryder. Terry, how are you?
I do well, Tim. Yourself?
Very good, thank you. So Terry, I'm really interested to learn, what are the core things that you're looking for to make up the locations within this National Top 10 report?
We're looking essentially for the places that aren't hot yet, but we think will be in the next 12 months, 2 years, 3 years and beyond. Quite often we're recommending locations in our Best Buys reports which are markets which aren't pumping at the moment, and we get a bit of pushback from some of our customers saying, why are you recommending these places? But the point is we're looking for the places that are going to be hot a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, not the places that are pumping and leading the nation on price growth right now. There's not much point in telling people about what's hot now, because all we're doing is telling them where they should have bought perhaps 2-3 years ago.
Yeah, fair enough. So in terms of traits that these suburbs are sharing, is there anything that stands out?
Look, they're all places that have got potential for future capital growth, and that's the common denominator there is a strong local economy, usually boosted by a strong infrastructure spend. In many cases, a good level of affordability, which helps to attract strong demand from all kinds of buyers. But I think just looking down the list for our current edition of National Top 10 Best Buys, one of the things that stands out is that most of them are markets that are not right now what you would call boom markets. They're places which are more what we might call second wind markets, places that have had a strong growth phase perhaps 2-3 years ago. In the last couple of years, they've been on pause mode, but we think they're poised for growth. They're ready to go again, hence we call them second wind markets.
Okay. And out of the top 10 selection this time, is there any markets that have surprised you?
Yeah, well, I think they don't surprise us because we picked them for the reasons that underpinned all our selections for our customers. Strong local economies, infrastructure spends, affordability, all of that. But the ones that I think will surprise perhaps journalists, commentators and clients generally would include Darwin, for example. We started including Darwin in the Best Buys report 3 or 4 months ago, and at the time people wondered why we'd placed Darwin so high in our estimation, because it's a place that hasn't performed for the last couple of years and hasn't been on the radar screens of investors. But we saw that the economy was improving, that buyer activity was starting to rise, and that the infrastructure spend relative to the size of the population there was very strong. So we started to include it. It's also included as the number 2 pick in our current edition of Best Buys, and we noticed that the latest price data coming through from PropTrack and CoreLogic and others shows that Darwin prices are now starting to lift as we expected.
Yeah. So, I mean, historically, Darwin has had a lot of up and down years and probably more down than up. What is it that's actually changed there that's put it on the radar for you now?
Look, I think the economy is improving, the infrastructure spend is rising, and investors are looking for affordable locations which have strong rental yields. And amongst all the 8 state and territory capital cities, Darwin has by far the strongest rental yields, both for houses and for units. So there is a prospect of buying in Darwin affordably, getting positive cash flow investment, but more importantly, prospects for capital growth. And that's starting to come through now in the price data, whereas locations that have previously been leading the boom like Perth are now starting to show stagnant prices. Prices no longer rising in that market, but Darwin's figures are showing that prices are starting to lift as we started to forecast towards the end of last year.
Okay. In some previous episodes, we've talked about the word or the term hotspot, as a lot of people may mistake it as a flash in the pan of growth and instead of long term. Do you see Darwin as a viable place for really long term capital growth?
Well, I believe so, and that's why we've included it. We always take that long-term approach. We're not looking for locations that are going to get a short-term sugar hit. I think Darwin's got longevity because there is significant spending on infrastructure, and these are projects in many cases that have a a lifespan of maybe 2, 3, 4 years in construction. So that's going to continue to provide impetus for the Darwin economy well into the future. But looking beyond the Northern Territory capital, other places on the list that are perhaps not currently pumping, but we believe will be, the Sunshine Coast, where I'm currently sitting, as a place that we've recommended in the past. Perhaps 2020 it was our #1 pick, and it did have 2 to 3 years of nation-leading price growth. The last couple of years it's been on pause mode, but we think now's the right time to be considering the Sunshine Coast again, because sales activity is starting to rise. It's still got that massive infrastructure spend. Many of those projects that we've highlighted in the past are a work in progress. It's got fantastic population growth, great lifestyle. It's becoming a major Australian city, in fact, indeed, an international city with an international airport. And so a place of serious critical mass now.
Well, I mean, anecdotally, we're also hearing a lot about Melbourne being prime for investment at the moment. What's your take on that?
Yeah, about perhaps 9, 12 months ago, one of our regular webinars, Tim, was titled "Why Melbourne Makes More Sense Now Than Perth." And what we were suggesting is, while investors were piling feverishly into the Perth market, getting towards the peak of a 3-year boom, Melbourne was pretty flat, but we felt that Melbourne had a strong future, and it made more sense to actually be buying in a market where prices were down before they started to rise than getting into markets when you read in the news media that there's a boom happening and you've probably missed the boat by 1 or 2 years to buy at the best time. So Melbourne is underpinned by a pretty solid economy. It has some of the best and strongest population growth anywhere in Australia, particularly boosted by overseas migration. Its pricing is really attractive because it hasn't had the growth in the last 2 years that we've seen in places like Perth, Adelaide and Brisbane. And we started to see very recently in our quarterly analysis of the sales activity figures, which is one of our big markers, that sales activity was starting to rise across Melbourne. And in the latest price data, we are starting to see the first sign of prices starting to react to that. So the current edition of National Top 10 Best Buys includes a couple of locations in Melbourne and also one in regional Victoria, because we think regional Victoria, similarly to Melbourne, is poised for a period of growth that we haven't seen for a couple of years, and at a time when the timing is good to buy there before prices do start to rise.
Yeah, well, one of the considerations for Victoria has always been that we traditionally have lower rental yields down here. I'm interested to know, when you're making a selection for the national top 10 best buys, how much does rental yield versus capital growth come into it?
Look, we tend to try and find locations that have a nice balance between the two, but probably if we have to make a choice, capital growth will come first, because that's what most real estate consumers, both home buyers and investors, are most looking for. They want to know that they're buying a place that's going to show good capital growth, to be a bit of an outlier or an outperformer on capital growth. If there's also good rental yields to be had, then that's a bit of a bonus. Some of the locations in our current top 10 list are slanted more towards capital growth, but there are others which have a nice blend, particularly if you're willing to consider one of the more compelling trends that's emerged in recent years, and that is buying units in townhouses as opposed to houses on block land, because the rental yields are stronger, the buying prices tend to be lower, and we're now seeing that type of product competing very strongly on capital growth as well.
Interesting. And what about regional versus metro? How's the national top 10 list balanced there?
Look, it's fairly balanced, pretty much 50-50. We've got regional locations spread across the country. Albury-Wodonga, which has been featuring in our report for the last couple of editions, is still there because it's very much what we would call a second wind market, as I mentioned earlier, a market that's had growth in the past. In the last couple of years it's been flatlining, but now showing signs of another spurt of growth. So Albury-Wodonga is included. Sunshine Coast, as I mentioned earlier, is high on the list. Launceston in Tasmania, a market that has been a fantastic growth market in the past, has been flatlining for a couple of years, but we're now starting to see the first signs that those regional Tasmanian markets like Launceston are starting to rise again. And we also include, for the first time in a while, Bendigo in regional Victoria. The recent data from the regional institute, the Regional Australia Institute, they have a regional movers index that they publish jointly with CoreLogic every 3 months, and shows very, very strong movement of population from Melbourne to regional areas, and particularly Bendigo, not too far from Melbourne and regional Victoria.
Yeah, right. And Terry, for I suppose anybody who's thinking about investing for the first time that's watching this show, how could they use the National Top 10 Best Buys report to get themselves into the market? Any advice that you'd have for them?
Well, it's very much a case of there's no one right answer to the question, where's the best place to buy? It very much depends on the individual, and one of the prime determining factors for each individual is just how much they can afford to spend. So the National Top 10 picks at the moment is quite a range of price points. We do tend to favour affordability as a criteria, but some markets like the Sunshine Coast have now become an expensive market. We include the city of Yarra in central Melbourne, and housing there is expensive, though units are more affordable. There's Canterbury Bankstown in the Greater Sydney area, where houses are typically 1.5 million or above, but units are much more affordable. So there's a whole range of price points. So the key for people is to get a hold of a copy of the report and look for locations that fit their personal criteria, particularly around price point, and focus on what we say in the report as to our reasons why we think this is a market that's going to outperform in the next 1, 2, 3 or more years.
Very good. Well, Terry Ryder, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to put a QR code on screen now for anybody who'd like to get a copy of that report. Use the coupon code TICKER and you will get 25% off. Thank you very much for joining us all. That's the play for today. This program is brought to you by hotspotting.com.au. This is Ticker. We'll be right back.
You're watching Ticker. We'll have more in just a few minutes.